It was a Thursday, May 24, 1990. The kind of day that held the promise of an approaching summer. In Muskegon, Michigan, a young woman named Sarah Mitchell was getting ready for her day. She was just 28 years old, a substitute teacher with a kind heart and a bright future. Friends described her as someone who saw the good in everyone. She was reliable, she was thoughtful, she was the kind of person you could count on. But on that spring day, something would go terribly wrong. Sarah was about to step into a mystery that would haunt her family and investigators for more than 3 decades. A mystery that began with a simple drive down a familiar highway. Sarah had plans that day. She was scheduled to substitute teach at a local elementary school. It was a job she loved, the chance to connect with children, to make a small difference. After school, she intended to visit her parents in a nearby town, a routine visit, the kind of thing she did often. She packed a small overnight bag. She told her roommate she would be back the next day. Everything was normal. Everything was planned. But Sarah Mitchell would never make it to her parents' house. She would never return to her own home. She simply vanished. And for 35 long years, the question would linger, a painful, unanswered whisper. What happened to Sarah? Her disappearance sent a shockwave through the community. How could someone just disappear? Especially someone like Sarah. She wasn't a risk-taker. She didn't have any known enemies. Her life was an open book, filled with simple joys and quiet ambitions. She loved books, long walks, and spending time with her family. The randomness of it all was terrifying. It suggested that what happened to her could happen to anyone. The fabric of safety that people wrap around themselves felt suddenly thin, easily torn. Her empty classroom chair, the unmade visit to her parents, these became symbols of a life interrupted, a story without an ending. The initial hours turned into days, the days bled into weeks. Hope, once a bright flame, began to flicker. Her family made public pleas for her return. Her face was on television screens and newspaper pages across the state. "Sarah, if you can hear this, please just come home," her mother begged, her voice trembling. "We love you, we just want to know you're safe." But the silence that answered was vast and profound. The search for Sarah Mitchell had begun, but no one could have known then that it would be a marathon, not a sprint. A long, agonizing journey into the unknown, with no map and no destination in sight. The timeline of that fateful day was pieced together bit by bit, like fragments of a shattered mirror. Sarah left the school around 3:30 p.m. She was seen by other teachers. She was smiling, talking about her weekend plans. She got into her blue 1988 Ford Escort and pulled out of the school parking lot. The plan was simple, a drive east on Interstate 96. It was a route she knew well, a stretch of highway that connected her world. But on this day, that familiar road would lead her into a nightmare, a journey from which she would not return. The first sign of trouble came from other drivers. Motorists on I-96 later told police they saw a blue Ford Escort pulled over on the shoulder. It was around 4:15 p.m. They saw a woman matching Sarah's description. She was talking to a man. He was standing next to a tow truck. It looked like a typical breakdown, a common roadside scene, nothing to raise an alarm. The woman seemed calm, perhaps a little frustrated. The man appeared helpful, a good Samaritan, or so it seemed. No one who saw them thought they were witnessing the first act of a terrible crime. They just kept driving. Another witness drove by a few minutes later. They saw something slightly different. The tow truck was still there. The blue car was still on the shoulder. But this time, the witness said it looked like the man was getting into the passenger side of Sarah's car. It was an odd detail. Why would a tow truck driver get into her car? Was he checking something? Was he giving her directions? The witness didn't think much of it at the time. It was just a fleeting observation, a snapshot from a moving vehicle. But in the years to come, that small, strange detail would be examined over and over again by investigators. The last credible sighting was the most chilling. Around 4:45 p.m., a truck driver reported seeing the blue Ford Escort back on the highway. It was moving slowly in the right lane, but the driver saw something that made him uneasy. He said it looked like the female passenger was slumped over against the window, and a man was driving. The truck driver couldn't see the man's face clearly. He thought maybe the woman was just asleep. He didn't call the police. It was a moment he would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. The last glimpse of Sarah Mitchell, a silent passenger on her own final journey. 2 days passed. 2 days of frantic worry for Sarah's family. They had reported her missing on Friday when she didn't arrive for her visit. Police were on the lookout. Then, on Saturday, May 26, 1990, a Michigan State police trooper got a call. A car had been sitting on an exit ramp off I-96 for a while now. It was about 20 miles east of where Sarah was last seen. The trooper drove to the location, and there it was. A blue 1988 Ford Escort. The license plate matched. It was Sarah Mitchell's car. The discovery was a breakthrough. But it was also a deeply ominous sign. The car was unlocked. The keys were in the ignition. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Inside her purse was her wallet, her identification, and a small amount of cash. Everything seemed to be there. Everything except Sarah. Her overnight bag was in the back seat. A book she had been reading was on the floor. The scene was eerily quiet. It was as if the driver had just stepped out for a moment and intended to come right back. But the layer of dust on the car told a different story. It had been sitting there for some time, waiting, silent. Crime scene investigators were called in. They went over the vehicle with meticulous care. They dusted for fingerprints. They collected fibers. They photographed every inch of the interior. But the car offered few clues. There were no obvious signs of a struggle. No blood, no torn clothing. It was clean, almost too clean. It felt staged. The only thing out of place was a man's cigarette butt in the ashtray. Sarah didn't smoke. This was a critical piece of evidence. A tiny clue that told investigators someone else had been in this car, someone who did not belong. The discovery of the car deepened the mystery rather than solving it. Where had she gone? If it was a robbery, why was her purse left behind? If she had run away, why leave her car and all her belongings? The police were stumped. The vehicle was towed to a secure impound lot, where it would be examined again and again over the years. It stood as the last place Sarah was known to be, a silent metal witness. It held the secrets of her final moments, but it wasn't talking. And the trail for investigators, which had seemed so warm for a moment, was quickly turning ice cold. The initial investigation was a flurry of activity. Police canvassed the area where the car was found. They interviewed dozens of people, the witnesses from the highway, Sarah's friends, family, and colleagues. They were searching for any lead, any scrap of information that could point them in the right direction. A composite sketch of the man with the tow truck was created based on witness descriptions. It was circulated widely. It appeared on the news and in papers. "Have you seen this man?" the headlines asked. But no one came forward with a name. The face in the sketch remained a ghost. Investigators faced immense challenges from the start. The crime scene, in a sense, was the entire stretch of I-96. Evidence was scattered, transient, memories were fleeting. The witnesses had only caught glimpses of the man. Was his hair brown or black? Was he tall or of average height? Their accounts varied slightly. It was enough to create a sketch, but not enough for a positive identification. The tow truck was another dead end. No local towing companies had a record of assisting a blue Ford Escort that day. It was possible the truck was fake, a prop in a sinister play. As weeks turned into months, the leads dried up. The phone calls slowed to a trickle. The case, once front-page news, moved to the back pages, and then disappeared from the papers altogether. For the police, it was a frustrating dead end. They had a missing person, a mysterious man, and a car with few clues. But they had no body, no murder weapon, and no suspect. Without new information, there was little they could do. The case file grew thicker with reports and interviews, but no closer to a solution. Sarah Mitchell's disappearance officially became a cold case. For the next 3 decades, the file sat on a shelf. It was a silent testament to a life unresolved. Every few years, a new detective would pull it down. They would read through the old reports. They would look at the grainy photos. They would wonder if they could see something their predecessors had missed. Anniversaries would come and go, marked by brief news stories and renewed pleas from Sarah's aging parents. But the silence remained. The mystery of the vanishing teacher on I-96 was frozen in time, a painful chapter in Michigan's history with no final page. The year is 2025. 35 years have passed. A lifetime. The world has changed in countless ways. Technology that was science fiction in 1990 is now, well, commonplace. And in a state crime lab, that technology was about to breathe new life into the coldest of cases. A detective with the Michigan State Police Cold Case Unit decided to take another look at the evidence from Sarah's car. Specifically, that cigarette butt found in the ashtray. In 1990, DNA testing was in its infancy, but now it was a powerful tool. A tiny sample of saliva, preserved for decades, was carefully analyzed. The lab was able to extract a full DNA profile from the saliva on the cigarette. It was a man's DNA. This profile was then run through the National DNA Database known as CODIS. For weeks there was nothing, and then, they got a hit. Not a direct match to a convicted offender, but something just as powerful. A familial DNA match. The profile was a close relative of a man in the system for a minor offense. This pointed investigators in a specific direction. It gave them a family tree to explore. After decades of searching for a nameless ghost, they finally had a name to investigate: Williams. Detectives began to build a profile of a man named Marcus Williams. He was 62 years old now. In 1990, he would have been 27. He had a minor criminal record back then, but nothing that would have put him on the radar for a major crime. The most startling discovery was his employment history. In 1990, Marcus Williams briefly worked for an auto repair shop, and sometimes he drove a tow truck. The pieces were clicking into place. This wasn't just a random name. This was a man who fit the profile. A man who was in the right place, at the right time, with the right skills to stage a breakdown. The team then looked for other similar crimes. They discovered a pattern. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, there were several other cases of women who had gone missing or been assaulted along Michigan highways. In one case, from 1988, a woman survived an attack after a man in a tow truck offered to help with her flat tire. She had fought him off and escaped. Her description of the man was hauntingly similar to the sketch in Sarah's case. The pattern was undeniable. Investigators realized they weren't just looking for Sarah's killer. They were hunting a potential serial predator who had remained hidden in plain sight for 35 years. In April of 2025, police arrested Marcus Williams at his home in Grand Rapids. He was a grandfather now, a quiet man who lived in a quiet neighborhood. His neighbors were shocked. They described him as a grumpy but harmless old man. They had no idea about the darkness he concealed. Investigators took him to an interrogation room. It was a stark, bare room, just a table and 3 chairs. For hours, Williams denied everything. He claimed he didn't remember 1990. He said he never drove a tow truck. He was calm, collected, and honestly, pretty defiant. The detectives were patient. They didn't raise their voices, they just laid out the evidence, piece by piece. They started with the DNA. "We have your DNA, Marcus," one detective said calmly. "It was in her car. Can you explain that?" Williams shifted in his chair. A flicker of something, fear, annoyance, crossed his face. He tried to explain it away. Maybe he knew her. Maybe he'd given her a cigarette once. The excuses were weak, and he knew it. Then, the detective showed him the composite sketch from 1990. It looked like a younger version of him. The resemblance was uncanny. The turning point came when they mentioned the other cases, the survivor from 1988, the other missing women. They told him they knew it wasn't just about Sarah. They knew he had done this before. They saw the pattern. Suddenly, the dam broke. The calm facade crumbled. Marcus Williams, after 35 years of silence, began to talk. He slumped in his chair, a man defeated by a past that had finally caught up to him. He confessed to everything. The story he told was cold, methodical, and utterly without remorse. It was the answer everyone had been waiting for, and honestly, it was more horrific than they could have imagined. He told them how he would cruise the highways in his tow truck looking for women stranded alone. He was a predator using a disguise of helpfulness. He saw Sarah Mitchell on the side of I-96 with her hood up. He pulled over, pretending to help. He disabled her car further, telling her it was a serious problem. He convinced her to let him give her a ride to a garage. She trusted him. He said that once she was in his truck, he drove her to a remote, wooded area. He admitted to assaulting and murdering her there. He then drove her car and abandoned it on the exit ramp to throw police off the trail. The confession was a major victory, but one crucial piece of the puzzle was still missing: Sarah. Her family had waited 35 years not just for answers, but for the chance to bring her home, to give her a proper burial, to have a place to visit, to mourn, to remember. The detectives pressed Marcus Williams for the location of her remains. He was initially vague. He said it was a long time ago. He claimed his memory was foggy. But the investigators were persistent. They knew he remembered. A crime like that is not something a person forgets. As part of his plea agreement, Williams agreed to lead investigators to the site. On a cold gray morning in May 2025, almost exactly 35 years after Sarah disappeared, a convoy of police cars drove Williams out to a rural part of Ottawa County. The area was now more developed than it had been in 1990, but large swaths of woods remained. Williams, now frail and handcuffed, walked with the detectives through the dense undergrowth. He looked around, trying to find a landmark from his memory. It was near a big oak tree, he mumbled, one that had been struck by lightning. After nearly an hour of searching, he stopped. Here, he said, pointing to a shallow depression in the ground covered by decades of fallen leaves. It was here. An archaeological team from the state police began the slow, delicate process of excavation. They carefully scraped away layers of soil. The work was painstaking. Everyone fell silent, a heavy sense of reverence hanging in the air. Then one of the team members paused. They had found something. Human remains. After so many years, the search for Sarah Mitchell was finally over. The remains were transported to the medical examiner's office. Dental records were used to make the confirmation. There was no doubt it was her. After 35 years lost in the woods, Sarah was found. The news was delivered to her family. It was a moment of profound sadness, but also of profound relief. The what-if that had tortured them for so long was gone. The uncertainty was replaced by a grim, painful truth. Their long-awaited homecoming was not the one they had dreamed of for decades, but it was a homecoming nonetheless. Sarah could finally be laid to rest. The courtroom was packed on the day of Marcus Williams's sentencing. It was June 12, 2025. Sarah's family was there. Her brother Michael, who was a teenager when she disappeared, was now a man in his 50s. Her parents, frail but resolute, sat in the front row. They had waited for this day for more than half their lives. They had endured decades of not knowing, of holidays with an empty chair, of birthdays that were just painful reminders. Now they were face to face with the man who had stolen their daughter, their sister, from them. Michael Mitchell stood up to give the family's victim impact statement. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled as he held the paper. He spoke not of hatred, but of loss. He described the vibrant, kind woman his sister was. He talked about the void her absence had created. "You didn't just kill Sarah that day," he said, looking directly at Williams, who stared blankly ahead. "You took a piece of all of us. You sentenced us to a lifetime of wondering, of hoping, of grieving without a grave. You stole her future, and you poisoned our past," he continued, his words filling the silent courtroom. "My parents never gave up hope. For 35 years they kept her room just as she left it, waiting for a miracle. That miracle never came. Instead we got you, a monster hiding in plain sight." He spoke of the milestones Sarah missed. Weddings, the births of nieces and nephews who would only know their aunt from photographs. He talked about the quiet daily pain of her absence, a song on the radio, a familiar laugh from a stranger, small things that would bring the grief crashing back. The judge sentenced Marcus Williams to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no applause in the courtroom, just a quiet, collective sigh of relief. Justice, delayed for so long, had finally been served. For Sarah's family, it was not a celebration. It did not bring Sarah back, but it was an ending. It was the closing of a terrible chapter. Outside the courthouse, Sarah's mother spoke briefly to reporters. "Today we have justice for Sarah," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Now we can finally begin to heal, and we can finally let her rest in peace." The resolution of the Sarah Mitchell case was a landmark event for law enforcement in Michigan. It was a powerful demonstration of the synergy between old-fashioned detective work and modern forensic science. It showed that no case is ever truly cold, that a single piece of evidence, carefully preserved, can hold the key to unlocking a mystery decades later. For other families of missing persons, the news brought a renewed sense of hope. It proved that answers are still possible, even after so many years of silence and waiting. The case has prompted a statewide review of other unsolved crimes from that era. Investigators are now re-examining cold cases with similar circumstances. Abductions along highways, unidentified remains. They are looking for connections to Marcus Williams. They believe it is unlikely that Sarah was his only murder victim. His confession was specific to her case, but he hinted at other crimes. The investigation is far from over. It has simply entered a new phase. The goal now is to bring closure to other families who have been waiting, just as the Mitchells did. The successful use of familial DNA in this case has also set a powerful precedent. It is a technique that can bridge gaps where traditional DNA matching fails. It allows investigators to cast a wider net, to find needles in haystacks that were previously unsearchable. Civil liberties groups have raised privacy concerns, and these are important discussions to have. But for law enforcement, it represents one of the most significant breakthroughs in forensic investigation in a generation. It offers a new way to pursue justice for victims whose cases have long been gathering dust. In the end, the story of Sarah Mitchell is a tragedy, a story of a life cut short, of a family shattered, but it is also a story of persistence. The persistence of her family who never gave up hope, the persistence of the detectives who refused to let her be forgotten, and the silent, patient persistence of science, 35 years is a long time to wait for answers. But for Sarah, and for all the others still out there, waiting to be found, this case is a promise that they are not forgotten, and that the search for truth, no matter how long it takes, never truly ends.